Welcome back to the Firebreak. I'm Steve Wolf. As you know, the Firebreak is sponsored by Team Wildfire, developing innovative technologies for putting out wildfires using jet engines. Check it out on the web at teamwildfire.com. I have got a fascinating guest with me today. I've got James Geering, and James and I have some interesting overlaps in our background. We both worked as stunt performers, and we both worked in fire service. And we've hopefully both come to some valuable or unique insights into how the learnings of one industry can help the other. Welcome to the Firebreak, James. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. Yeah, when I really dove into, your background, it made me twice as excited. I was already excited, but seeing that cross-pollination of these two different professions that we've both been a part of, I'm looking forward to this chat.
Likewise. So I first became aware of your work on LinkedIn when I read an article that you'd written about shift work, which certainly affects firefighters, EMTs, doctors. I mean, lots of shift workers out there. Some people get on a fixed shift. Some people's shifts get bounced around. I remember being fascinated by this years ago when they did studies on butterflies, and they found that if they switched their circadian rhythms a few times, they could shorten their lives by 20%.
Same with humans.
We're butterflies, James, but tell me a little bit about the research that you've done and the people who are impacted by it.
Yeah,
when I say done, I should add the research that you've aggregated.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you've pulled research from many sources.
Yeah, well, this is the problem, is that there isn't much research in the fire service when it comes to the impact of shift work on firefighters and EMTs and paramedics specifically. My kind of origin story of all the projects that I do now was just numerous funerals, 6 funerals in 2 years of my friends, my brothers in this particular case. And so it took me down this deep dive of, what is the underlying issue? Because I've got a history, background as an exercise physiology grad, or I have a degree, I don't know if grad's the right word, a coach, an athlete. So a good understanding of what the questions should be asked and what the solution should look like, but I'm by no means an expert. So I started taking a dive into this. I heard a former Navy SEAL, Kirk Parsley, on Barbell Shrugged, which is a strength and conditioning podcast, probably 9 years ago now. And he was talking about this. He had all these SEALs. He was a SEAL during pre 9/11, so somewhat peacetime. So he ended up becoming a physician, and then went back to the West Coast teams as their doctor. And he's seeing this blood work, every, however many months they drew it, every 3 months or so. And he's like, what is going on? These are like 80-year-old women on paper. And as he kind of progressed through...
Nothing against 80-year-old women, by the way.
No, exactly. But your blood work should look different than a Navy SEAL.
Yes.
So he, after about a year, started hearing over and over again that all these guys were taking Ambien. And so he had this kind of aha moment. He dove into the sleep medicine world and was like, how do we not know this? And so he's relaying this story on this podcast, and I'm sitting there driving on the way to a fire station going, how do we not know this? So then you open the door of the world of sleep medicine. All of a sudden, all the things that we suffer from in the fire service, that is a big contributing factor. It's not the only thing, but it's a massive part. So then I started looking not only at the shifts that we work, but then the mandatory overtime that's been present, early in my career, but is absolutely rife now as the recruitment crisis gets worse and worse and worse. And you look at the people that we ask to truly save lives, that operate, machinery that's going opposing traffic, that are hanging from ropes off the side of a skyscraper, that are pushing meds on a pediatric cardiac arrest at 3 a.m. And they have the worst sleep of any profession out there. So that was really kind of, the beginning of this journey, was realizing how far from the performance world we had fallen in the fire and EMS world.
Well, and how far is that?
A long way. A long way. It's funny, I was just talking to Chris Hinshaw yesterday, who is the endurance guru from CrossFit, and he works now with first responders, but also a lot of the tier 1 groups and the special forces, special operations space. And I was kind of putting something that's been very apparent to me very, very recently. When you talk about strength and conditioning and nutrition with that group of people, who also lives depend on, who also, at the tip of the spear. And so many of that community holds police, fire, EMS at the same level as themselves. Because people forget when they're overseas, who's protecting their family? We are. So, and when we were talking about the strength and conditioning, that they're forging performance, elite performance. They've got nutritionists, they've got sports psychologists, they've got all the things. If you hear a strength and conditioning coach or nutritionist talking about the first responder profession, the conversation is, well, let's try and get some of them to not die as much. It's so far from performance. And in the perfect example in the stunt world, if you're setting up a stunt or you got a sword fight or a high fall or whatever it is, there's no room for kind of mediocre performance. If you get a sword through your eye or you misjudge a fall, now you land square on your neck. I mean, that's game over. And it's the same thing in my profession. So this is, and even with the working environment, going back to the shifts, if you want to actually forge performance, if you want those people that show up on a fire engine or in a police car at your family's worst day, you have to give them that rest and recovery, that work week that forges that performance. And we've just allowed our profession to devolve to the point where, I mean, I'm not being dramatic. A lot of our men and women are just like hanging on. If you get 15, 20 years into a career, you're so chronically sleep deprived. You've accumulated all these traumas, and it's not doom and gloom. It's just, if you ask the NFL to work for 20 years and not sleep 3 times a week, how fun would the Super Bowl to be watched? It probably wouldn't be very entertaining. So therein lies the problem.
Catch the ball and fall asleep.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Use it as a pillow.
So let's dive into the specifics then. In your article, you talked about, different shift patterns, 24, 72, 48, 72, etc. Can you break that down for, because not everyone is familiar with the shift work. What do these shifts mean? And what does the research show are the least impactful negatively?
So the old school fire service, outside of obviously the volunteers, used to do kind of like 12 and 12 or 10 and 14. And as it's progressed, a lot of them...
That means 12 hours on, 12 hours off.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Or 12.
Okay.
Yeah.
Break it
10,
down. Exactly.
So one would do 10 hours. The next shift would do the next 14, and it would kind of cycle. Then as you progress forward, a lot of them go to 24s. So we do, and this is what's so crazy. So when you ask someone, including us, what is the shift schedule like for firefighters, we say, oh my God, it's amazing. I only work 10 days a month. And so we've even told this kind of fairy tale to ourselves. And then we tell our neighbors and our friends and our family. And this is what's made it so hard, is that people are like, well, you already have an amazing shift. What are you talking about?
Right.
The problem is we call a day 24 hours. Now, a civilian work day is 9 hours with a 1 hour lunch. So 8 hours. I think that's pretty accepted across the board.
9 to 5, right.
5 8s to 40-hour work week.
Yep.
So what we actually work, if we kind of, pull the curtain back, is we work 3 days on, 1 day off, or 30 days a month. And I actually did a calculation the other day. A 40-hour, 9 to 5 worker would work, if you extrapolate over a year, that's 260 days a year. That's obviously not including vacation and stuff, but with the weekends. A firefighter working the 56-hour work week is 364 days a year. So you get 1 day off a year.
So what do you want to do with that day, James?
So this is the problem, is that, we have told ourselves a lie. We haven't educated the public on what we actually do. And so the kind of patterns that are out there, most of us work either a 24-48, so 24 hours on, a full, so you go in at 7, you leave at 7 a.m. the next day. And yes, there are some stations in some parts of the country that are quieter. Most of people are running 2, 3, 4, 5 calls through the night. So you're not sleeping. And if you are sleeping, you're literally one eye open waiting to get a call. So very poor quality sleep.
Yes. There's
another shift schedule, which it just, oh God, it nauseates me when I hear people have gone to it. It's a 48-96. So now you've put 2 days together without sleeping. And sadly, this is the perfect example of what they say, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. There was a study done that showed that the 4896 was healthier than the 2448. The problem is no one actually looked into the study, because I had the guy who did the study on the show. He did it on a fire department that ran one call a shift in that whole 24 hours, and usually less than one, so 0 most nights. So the actual only takeaway was, because you woke up in the fire station, you hadn't run a call, and this is a very small kind of isolated fire department, then yeah, you didn't have to get up early to go to the fire station. That second day was a slight benefit. That could be remedied for free by just starting at a later time at any fire station, any fire department. Start at noon. Now you don't have to get up at 5 in the morning to get to the station. You wake up with your family, you kiss them goodbye as they go to school and work, and then you go. So that one terrifies me, because 48 hours without sleep, we know what it does. I mean, we literally use sleep deprivation.
Well, you know what it does, but what does it do?
I mean, think of it this way, just to illustrate it. Sleep deprivation is used for interrogation. It's used for torture. It's used for special forces selection. Green Berets, Rangers, Buds. That's a specific tool, but that's for a week, 5 days. This is ongoing for 10, 20, 30 years. And what it does is everything. So if you're looking at the acute impact cognitively, and this is such an interesting statistic, because when you kind of unpack it, it's even worse. If you don't sleep for 24 hours, you have the same cognition as someone who is 0.1 blood alcohol. So you would fail a breathalyzer test. That's one night's sleep. If you think about when that research was done, most likely it was young college students that were the subjects, like most research, who probably
a little more resilient.
Yeah, and they slept in their bed every night. Yeah, they might have been out partying and drinking sometimes, but more often than not, they would have been 9-to-5ers, college students, lots of time off, time in bed. And so if you think of, well, if it's 0.1 for a fresh person to miss 1 day's sleep, what is it like 10, 15, 20 years later of every third day being awake? So it's probably way worse than that. And I remember one of the last calls I ever ran before I transitioned out, I pulled out on the front apron, the concrete in front of the fire station. I knew my area really well. I couldn't even remember if I had to turn left or right, even to head towards the address. So that's how much it breaks down. I think about that. When you have these horrible accidents at intersections, and a fire engine or an ambulance will barrel into a minivan full of kids, a lot of times I'm told they don't see a skid pattern. And it's because the drivers have what they call micro sleeps. So for a second, you're asleep at the wheel and you just barrel right through. So there's that. Like I said, there's the drugs that we have to push, and the calculations that we have to do, the things that we have to do at height. So cognitively, it's so dangerous. And then if you look at the long-term chronic effects of sleep deprivation, it's known carcinogen, shift work is, for cancer. There's an absolute correlation between sleep deprivation and all of the mental health things, from addiction, suicide, depression, anxiety, direct correlation. It destroys your hormones, so your testosterone's in the toilet. A little challenge for everyone that's not in the profession. If you haven't get in a conversation, you know someone well enough, ask them what their testosterone is. I guarantee you, if they're, fire especially, but police, EMS, and they are in their, late 20s, early 30s, their testosterone will probably be in the toilet, where it should be extremely high. They're a tactical athlete in uniform. The weight
gain. I have to say, though, as we get older, it's really a pleasure dealing with people who don't have such high testosterone.
There's a good level. There's a mid ground,
a healthy level. Yeah.
And then even like the weight gain, people kind of make fun of the fat cops, for example. If you look at what it does hormonally, like it does affect your insulin, it does affect your leptin and ghrelin, the appetite regulators. And, you crave caffeine, you crave sugar. So the coffee and donuts thing, there's literally science behind that. So all of the things that you look at are affected by sleep deprivation. So again, are they the only thing? No. But, telling a cop who, let's say, is an understaffed, undersupported police department, oh, you just need to, eat some salad and get up every morning at 5 and take an ice bath. There's more to it than that. Do I think that they should be walking around 100 pounds overweight? No. And there should be things in place to get people back to where they need to be, or transition out, whatever's safest for them. But we've got to factor in the environment too. So for me, going to, as you mentioned, the 24/72, if we have a 56-hour work week, one mandatory overtime, which I had most of my career, you're about to go home and you've got, donuts with dad at the school at 11, and you get a phone call at 7 o'clock in the morning, say, Geering, you can't go home. We need you. We're understaffed. That's not going to fly in most places. You're at a grocery store and they're like, yeah, we need to stay another 12 hours. They're like, yeah, good luck with that. I'm out.
Not happening. Right.
So now you made a 56-hour and 80-hour work week for these people with all these responsibilities. So the answer is the 42-hour work week. So 24, again, that same 3 days squished together, but then a 72-hour period. So at least you've given them, because if you think about it, when you come off shift, you're getting off at 8 in the morning, you've done midnight to 8. So that's not a day off either. You worked 8 hours. So it's only that third day that is a day off. So now you've just given them 2 days off between these 24-hour shifts. That's it. It's not.
Why 24-hour shifts? Why do we do that to firefighters and not to anyone else?
So it does work. I think another thing people don't realize, a lot of us are fire and EMS. So we wear two hats. In Europe, where I'm from, the firefighters are starting to get a little bit first responder-y, but there's still the paramedics and the firefighters, and they're separate. Over here, I was a firefighter and a paramedic. So you're kind of a Swiss Army knife, and that's a lot of skills that you've got to stay on top of. It's a lot of training. Then obviously it's a physical job. So there's the physical fitness. So when I think back, firstly, from an operational point of view, for me to do all the check-ins between running all these calls that we are going to get, and the training and the online training and testing hydrants and all the other things that we have to do, come 8 o'clock, even 12 hours in, we're still finishing up stuff. I know I am. So for then someone to come in and have to do it all over again just doesn't make any sense. The fire stations have beds, so you are at least able to kind of try and take a nap. And it's all you're really getting in a fire station is a nap. You're never getting into deep restorative sleep because you're waiting to get woken up by a call. But the 24s, they maintain the circadian rhythm, as you touched on. So even if the butterfly is awake some of the night, it still knows when morning is and when night is. So the hormonal chemistry at least is still intact somewhat.
It's not like a casino where you have no idea what time it is.
Exactly. Yeah, or the cheap rooms in a cruise.
Right.
But if you look at 12s, or 10s and 14s, when they split it up, you're always going to have a shift, as you touched on at the beginning. Right, this is your day shift, this is your night shift, this is your day shift. And now your circadian rhythm is like, what the hell is going on? And if you look at professions that work those kind of shifts, if it was a great shift, then they would be svelte athletes. But we're talking about ER doctors and nurses who usually, and not all, but a lot of times they're overweight, they're smokers, because again, that same environment, they didn't set out on the medical journey to improve their or increase their likelihood of getting the very diseases that they're treating in the ER. That's the irony. It's like the firefighter doesn't wear a seatbelt, but the environment kind of breaks them down too. Correctional officers, not exactly a picture of health usually. Dispatchers, 12 hours, changing. And then our law enforcement officers, some are in great shape, but a lot of them do struggle. So that switching from days to nights, that changing that circadian rhythm is actually very poor. Now, can a police officer do a 24-hour shift? No. So the answer for those kind of professions is, again, give them more rest and recovery between their shifts. Allow them and don't bounce them around. If you're young in the profession, then you might get the nights for a while. As you kind of progress through, then it shifts to days. Everyone has a turn in the barrel, as they say. But so I think in the fire service, the 24s do make sense because of all those elements. So, and if you give that extra 24 hours in between now, and a lot of the sleep medicine people had on the show, they're like, now you're getting to the point where they've got a chance of at least getting close to baseline again. But if you've got, 24, 48 and then mandatory overtime, I mean, they're just dropping. So
we're killing first responders essentially with their schedules.
100%. We are working our people to death.
Okay. And you feel like there's a legitimate reason to have 24-hour shifts versus doing 10s or 12s?
Yeah, I think, like I said, for that particular dynamic, yes. Does it make sense in a hospital or law enforcement? No. But
No,
because again, we're responsible for so much because we already have houses in place around the country, firehouses. The ability to take those naps and then get that period in between, I think that still is the safest model. And even, I asked the sleep medicine people, and they're like, yeah, the 12s they're not good. The ultimate shift would be a 9 to 5, and they
right.
go to bed, but someone has to be awake at night. So the next best thing is, all right, is really any profession. How can we give them more rest and recovery? And then what's interesting, if you look at the progressive corporate space, I just posted post the other day, 200 companies in England now, or the UK, have shifted to a 4-day work week. That's still 9-hour days, 4 days. And they're finding the same, if not more, productivity. There's actually efficiency, there's innovation, and of course, a much healthier, happier workforce. So the corporate space is seeing we can give more rest and recovery and still get the same, sometimes even better results. But my profession and associate professions are just pushing against it. But it ends up being a false economy. Because just think about the epic cost of all this overtime, of the lack of retention. Like, people are not wanting to be cops, firefighters at the moment. And there's an easy turn for that, which is change the work environment. The lawsuits from when we make mistakes, when we hit that car, when we push that wrong drug, when we're too rough with that person we're arresting, there are millions and millions and millions of dollars downstream. And as I think it was 𝐬𝐮𝐻𝐫𝐿 Tutu said, instead of jumping in and pulling people out of the river, why don't we go upstream and see who's throwing them in the first place?
That's great. Thank you, Desmond. That's great. So you think the best shift would be 24 on and then 96 off?
72. I mean, 96 would be even better, because arguably, if the person who makes coffee in Starbucks, and I use this example, I love my coffee and I go to Starbucks, so it's not me looking down my nose. If they tap out at 40 hours, arguably the first responders should probably have a slightly lower work week because of the intensity of what they do. But yeah, the 24/72 would be a 42-hour work week. So still a little bit more than a lot of people that work 9 to 5, but at least we're getting down to that point now.
Right. And at Starbucks, sleep deprivation, you might get oat milk instead of almond milk with your cappuccino, but
exactly,
probably nobody dies, right? Unless they have a nut allergy or a lactose issue.
Yeah, exactly. And then they'll call who?
Now that I think about Starbucks, really is a life job, right? Yeah. So, all right. So 96 would be better. 72 hours off, which is 3 days. So
yeah,
one
so
on,
24 on, 3 off. Yeah, and it's right. I don't use that verbiage because of that.
So compared to a 9 to 5, what are the health consequences of even an optimal, suboptimal schedule? So 9 to 5 versus 24/72.
That's a good question, because I've never been asked that before specifically. But yeah, you are still worse, So 9 to 5, and again, I understand that there are all these life stresses. We got to remember, these first responders have these life stresses too, and then they compound it with sleep deprivation and the other things. But if you think about, okay, you're now in a good place. Your kids are old enough where they're not waking up through the night, so you're back to normal. I mean, if you think about a 9 to 5 position, you go home, you spend time with your family that evening, you go to bed, hopefully you get solid 8 hours sleep, you wake up, you have breakfast with your children if you're fortunate enough not to have to commute a long way, like I know some of our people do in cities, and then off you go to work again. So every single night you have the potential of a very good sleep. Yes, there's colds and crying babies and all the other stuff, but you have that potential. So you never have that break. And if you do have a break, sleep debt is real. Hopefully the next day, maybe you can sleep in a little bit, or that Sunday morning or whatever it is, and you'll catch up that bit that you lost. With 24/72, you've still got every 4 days now a completely sleepless night. Like, there's been, numerous shifts I've had, fires, just back to back to back medical calls, where I literally have not slept. And then the rest of the time is, like I said, extremely poor quality sleep, where you may be in the bunk room between calls. But I always tell people, imagine those massive cymbals they have in the orchestras, that someone stood over your bed and say, I'm going to smash these in your ears at some point tonight. How well would you sleep? Well, that's what we do, because it's not just that
Right.
you're waking up, and depending on the call, you might go 0 to 100 because it's a structure fire and people are trapped, or it's a horrendous wreck on the freeway, or a child is choking. It's not just oh, I've got to wake up, I'll make myself some coffee. No, you're literally out of bed and on a fire engine or truck literally within about 60 seconds. So yeah, it's a very different environment. So this is the whole point, is we're moving it towards being better, but it's still not optimal. But at least we're so the resistance of not changing now when it's 56 or 80 hours just shows you how crazy it is, based on the responsibility that we have and all the dangers in our job, when you put it side by side with the person who is at the checkout in the grocery store. Love them. I just went to Publix today in Florida, but lives are not in their hands at that moment.
Right. And there, you talked about the cymbals waking you up, and the horrible klaxon, the station alarm. And I'm sure in Florida you're familiar. There's a company there that's actually making a wristwatch to wake firefighters that just gently vibrates.
I didn't hear about that.
Oh yeah. All right. I'll put you together with them.
Thank you.
But they said the manner in which you're awakened also has a big impact on your cortisol levels and your stress levels. That being woken gently is nicer than being woken up to literally a fire alarm.
That's so clever, though, because one of the problems, and I'm sure they've probably talked to you about this already, one of the most ridiculous things that I've witnessed, certainly in the last couple of departments that I worked at, was you have, a communal bunk room. So you might have partitions, almost like an office, for each bed,
Yes.
but you're in a massive room. And so the tones go off, and let's say there's, three rigs, a truck, an engine, and a rescue. Let's say it's the rescue. So two people in Florida would go to that where I worked. So you woke up, all 4 people or 3 people on the truck, and the same on the engine, and maybe the chief is in the station too, for 2 people to go on a call. It's insanity. And the progressive stations now are building individual bunk rooms per unit, which I think is absolutely fantastic. You just got to be careful not to go hide in them all day. Now you lose that community.
Right.
But, and then there was ones where they had LEDs and tones by every single bunk. And so it would gently just wake up. You'd obviously sleep in units so that you were next to your rescue partner. And that worked. You trusted it. And after a while, you did sleep through, better at least. But yeah, if there's something on your body that's waking you up that doesn't wake up the rest of the bunk room, I really want to kind of learn more about that.
Yeah, I'll definitely put you together. I just visited Boulder County's newest firehouse, which is Station House 3. Brand new. I think, the Four Seasons Hotel would be lucky to have a property so nice.
Oh, wow.
So, individual rooms, the perfect workout rooms, laundry facilities, cleaning equipment, and a loop-de-loop slide to go down instead of the pole. I mean,
that breaks my heart. I get it from a safety point of view, but I don't know. I love my poles. We had like almost a 3-story slide in my old place in California, and it was awesome. But yeah, when you come out half asleep, it was a little precarious. I get it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, maybe it acts as a selector. Like if you hit the ground too hard, we know you haven't had enough sleep, and
yeah, we'd have a pile of bodies.
You've broken your ankle and self-selected out. Right.
Yeah.
So I know they do. It's relatively easy in police circumstances to evaluate the impact of sleep deprivation, because they can go into a consequenceless shoot no shoot scenario, and you realize, okay, the less sleep they have or the higher the blood pressure is, the more often they shoot the wrong person or get shot.
Yeah.
What would be the equivalent safe ways to measure the functional impact of sleep deprivation on firefighters?
From what I've seen, because you're absolutely right, those kind of cognition tests, I think, are extremely pertinent. The military has a lot of data on that. But again, my profession, I wonder, even with Boulder, and I've been to Boulder, I love that city, with all this technology, all that money poured into the stations, what is their work week like? I would hazard a guess it was 56. So, you've got the slide. So, we don't want to allow firefighters to roll their ankles, but what are we doing about the individual themselves? So But yeah, if you look at the militaries, there's no question. I just had a couple of experts on, Alison Brager and Rachel Marquardt, which are the Army and Navy sleep experts. And yeah, I mean, you can just absolutely see it. The only thing I can see in the fire service, because we haven't done any of those studies, and it would be, like I said, we don't shoot weapons, and I think that is a good kind of indicator. But you've also got these kind of brain cognition games, so I think those would be the ones for us. And then even from what I understand, they're starting to develop like an AI system where you can even look at a human face. And I know from a mental health point of view, between that and the words they're saying and the intonation, that you can detect struggles. And I'm sure there's an absolute correlation with sleep deprivation too. Because even if you think about it, on some of the cars, they're talking about that technology now where if you look like you're starting to sleep, the smart car will pull over. So that's great. But the real key is, well, how do we stop people getting there in the first place? Have that as a safety net. But, I think I think if that was the case, if we had this technology on all the fire engines, trucks, and rescues in America, they'd all be sitting on the side of the road. None of them would move.
Yeah, right. There's an amazing app that I suggest you check out. It's called Wing Driver. And it uses facial recognition on your own phone. So you mount your phone pointed at you. When you fire up the app, it asks you look left, look right, look down. So it synchronizes, and then it alerts you if you're inattentive to the screen in front of you, to the I guess I haven't had enough sleep. If you're inattentive to the windshield, there you go. Right. So if you look away from the windshield, if you look down at the radio and it's more than 3/4 of a second, it'll buzz and let you know that your attention's not good, and it'll give you a score at the end of your drive as to what the quality of your attention was to the road.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
A free app, and it works amazingly well.
Yeah, I have to look into that. Thank you. I got my son's going to be going to college in the fall, so maybe between now and then I can get them put on his phone too. So that, I'm not so worried, because you can imagine being a first responder parent when you've seen the things that we see. Every time they don't return a call in time, you're immediately thinking they're in some fiery wreck or something. So, yeah.
Right. What are other technologies? So it doesn't take technology to change a schedule, right? I mean, there are technologies that could help recognize the impacts. You've fallen out of focus a little bit.
Yeah, no, there we go.
I think it's because it's the sleep deprivation, right? Or is it my eyes? Right. So there's technologies, right, that could recognize the sleep deprivation and recognize what the contributing factors are that impact it. But it takes people to change the schedule. So that's really simpler than technology, right? Just say, hey, Jimmy, you're not working 48s anymore, and you're going to 24/72s. That's an executive decision that should be relatively easy to make. What's the resistance to making that, and how much evidence do people need to see before they do it?
There's a phrase I love, and someone said this to me once, and I looked it up yesterday trying to find the quote, and I didn't find it anywhere. So I wish I could remember who it was now, because I would credit them for the quote. But they said, "Don't wait for science to prove what you already know is true." And people, I'm all for data, of course. There are times where that absolutely makes sense. There's a drug and it's going to be developed for, certain illness that your child has. Yeah, I need to see the data before you put that in my child's body.
Right.
But when it comes to other things, and I did a post the other day, and it was obviously tongue in cheek, but waiting for science or data to show that a 42-hour work week is healthier than a 56-hour work week is not like waiting to enter a structure fire naked until you've seen the science that shows that bunker gear and an air tank would be helpful.
That's great.
There's a certain point where I think people use that I need to see data really out of cowardice to hide behind.
Yeah, that's right.
We know that we have an epic problem. So the way that we've done it, that is your data. If we work 56 hours, 80 hours, and it was healthy, I wouldn't even have a podcast. I wouldn't have written 2 books. It would just be, business as usual. I'd still be riding the rig and thriving. But that's not the case. We have a mental health crisis. We have a physical health crisis. We have a recruitment crisis. We have a relationship crisis. So, if that's how not to do it, then obviously the equal and opposite is also true. So where the resistance I see is, and if I'm being completely blunt, if you have all the information and you refuse to act, I see cowardice in leadership. I really do. Because
I see negligence.
Exactly. Because you are, let's say you are a fire chief, to pick on them for a second. You have, all these bugles and stripes on your jacket. You've got a six-figure salary. You're working 40 hours a week. You go home at 5 every night. And your people are taking their own lives, dying of cancer, divorces everywhere, alcoholism. And I'm not doom and glooming it. This is actually behind the curtain what the fire service is struggling with. And you refuse to act, then shame on you. And I think where the courageous leaders can really just get their make their case for this is, again, if you look, for me, I started this podcast because I lost friends. I do an annual fundraiser competition for the 343 that we lost in 9/11. I didn't know a single of them, any one of them personally, but we are a brotherhood and a sisterhood.
You're your brothers, absolutely.
So if I can feel that for firefighters that at the time were thousands of miles away, because I was still back in the UK. Actually, I was in Japan when the towers hit. Then why can't you do that for the very people that serve under you, that wear the same uniform? But so that human factor should be enough. And it's the same, the unions, the same for the city and county, board members. These are your people. If they're dying, that should be enough to move you to, search the corners of the planet for solutions for this. But say for a moment, that's not enough. The financial side. If you look at the fact that we have this recruitment crisis and we've got all these vacancies, and all these, men and women that are still wearing uniform are filling these holes. So that's another day without mum or dad coming home for these kids. Now you're passing on multi-generational trauma as well. But like I said, the overtime, depending on the size of the department, is millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. You've got, again, where we will pay a lot of money to hire people, train them, put them through school, and then 2-3 years later, they walk out the back door, either to a different department or to leave the fire service. So that's millions and millions that you've lost. The workman's comp claims, if you've got a broken fire service, then there's a lot of injuries, there's a lot of medical retirements. So that's millions and millions because, yes, it's an insurance, workman's comp, but the premiums would come down if you had a healthy workforce. As I touched on, the lawsuits, just imagine, the Uvalde shooting. How many hundreds of millions are probably attached to that because of poor leadership? So there's so much money downstream. And I am not an economist. I'm not even very good with math. If it's not involving drug calculations or pumping a fire hose, I'm out. So, but if you can understand the false economy of breaking your people and wasting all this money, which in turn massively lowers the delivery of service to the public and makes it dangerous on our roads when we're snaking through, half asleep, then the equal and opposite is true. So yes, you have to be courageous, and this is where the resistance is. You have to go to your city or county and say, we have a crisis. We are going to need some more money because we're going to have to hire over the next 3 years X amount of firefighters. The bigger the department, the more firefighters. But we will then continue to save money year after year after year. Because when people have gone to this new schedule, I'll use Gainesville, where University of Florida is an example. They just went recently. All the good recruits started testing with them. April, so 2 months from now, they're going to be fully staffed. And they've had, a list again. Because there's people that understand, when I started in the fire service, you were testing against thousands of people. For like Anaheim, California, it was over 1,000 people and there were 30 jobs. And these were certified firefighter, paramedic, EMT, wildland experience. You name it, resumes like this. So that's who you need. You want to be, okay, this is 1,000 people. We're going to take this top little section here, the best recruits. That's who we want to be wearing our uniform. So now you've attracted all these people because you've shown them, hey, we actually care about you. You put this fourth shift in. You've now got this extra 24 hours in between shifts. You know, you're going to be with your family a lot more. The mandatory overtime will now only be California wildfires, Florida hurricanes, you know, Kansas tornadoes, when we need you to come in, and no one will have an issue with that. Of course, you know, kiss your loved ones. I've got to go help my community. But outside of that, I'm home every fourth day religiously. And so then people say, well, what about, you know, the other departments? We can't get people now. Well, again, we used to have thousands, you know, to test for a few positions. Show these young people who, I just shared a New York Times article, trades are booming now. These Gen Z kids are wanting to go in the trades because college on paper also looks terrible. $50,000 in debt and a piece of paper that you can't get a job with.
That's for one semester.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they're smart, you know, they look at the fire service and go, that looks terrible at the moment. They look at college, but they're going into welding and construction and plumbing and all these things because you go to school, they teach you how to do a thing, and then you get paid to do that thing. Well, the fire and EMS and law enforcement, we're the same. But, you know, we've shown that we don't care about the actual health of the workforce. So you take that downstream money, you put it in, you invest in a fourth shift. And then, of course, there's other things you can do. Put in a fitness standard, as you mentioned, have access to fitness facilities, hire a counselor that's part of your department. So these first responders at the front door can start having mental health conversations. But you've freed up that money for all that stuff by stopping the bleeding financially, by fixing this crisis. So this is what I really struggle with. I'm not a smart man. I never rose above the rank of firefighter. I love that rank. I didn't want to rise above it, but you know, I don't have a master's or a PhD in business or anything like that. If my, you know, dumbass can figure this out, then it's glaring to people that really know what they're doing, that look at the economics. So then it boils down to, are you courageous enough to actually lead and be the person that you know, are wearing on your jacket? Or do you need to step down and let someone else do it? So that is, I think, the real resistance is actually having the courage to do your job and advocate for not only your people, but the community that you serve as well.
Yeah. Well, with regarding that data, you know, there's the saying, I don't need a weatherman to tell me it's raining outside.
Exactly. 100%.
Yeah.
Because if you did in Florida, you'd be disappointed. It changes every 4 hours.
Did you post the lighthouse, the lamppost quote? I saw.
Yes. Yeah. It was like
and that stuck with me, right? Right. It said that people people use statistics the way a drunk person uses a lamppost for support, but not for illumination.
Exactly. I'm glad you remembered it because I forgot the quote. But yeah, that was exactly it.
No, it really stuck with me, and I thought that was great. So, in terms of the economics, right? It makes more sense to do these preventative things like putting people on healthier shifts or doing, you know, pre-fire mitigation of vegetation, right? Because it's ultimately a lot cheaper. The thing is, you know, that you have to see the economic benefit within the 4 years, right? Within the 4 years of the elected officials, right? Because people aren't willing to spend money now to save money later. That's an unfortunate fact of the U.S., which you've probably recognized.
Yeah. There's a quote I love. I think it's, you know, plant the seed of a tree under which to shade you'll never know. And that's what we're missing, the servant leader. You know, I mean, what I do doesn't benefit me. I transitioned out of the fire service 6 years ago. I sleep in my own bed every night, but I care, and you know, about my people. And this is what our leaders have to do, especially, as I pointed out, if you work 40 hours, but you're telling your workforce they can't work less than 56. I mean, think about that.
Right.
You know, you go home every day.
So I think, given that people respond more to fear than to doing the right thing, one way to get change there would simply be, you know, you send a certified letter to the chief of the department, enumerating the risks and highlighting the data, and say, okay, you know, we know that the shifts that you're putting people on are very dangerous to themselves and to the community that they serve. Here's the data that points that out. You're now notified. If something happens, you know, it's on you, and you can't say you didn't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, right. So you could literally send that to every fire marshal, and then it's legally on them. I mean, it can raise a lawsuit from negligence to gross negligence if there was willful violation of of a safety protocol.
Yeah,
And this certainly is one.
absolutely.
To jump back into our old career for a second, in movies, right, that you work days and you work nights, and sometimes there's not an even transition, right? You've been on days for 10 weeks, and then all of a sudden, okay, the next day you're on nights, right? So when I was doing stunts or special effects, particularly pyro, I put it in my contract with the production company that pyro could not be done outside of X number of hours from my normal sleeping schedule. So if I was normally in bed at midnight, I could do pyro up till 2, but I wasn't going to do it at 4 because I wasn't going to take the risks associated with operating outside normal sleep hours.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And when they say, oh, well, sorry, the dialogue run late. It's not going to be till 5:30 in the morning. I'd say, well, then we're going to schedule on another day. Yep. Because, Copernicus could have told you when 5:30 was going to come, hundreds of years ago. And if you failed to heed the clock, that's on you, not on me. And there were jobs, where I got literally slapped in the face by directors, because I wouldn't break a safety protocol for the convenience of their shoot.
Well, good for you for standing by your principles, though, because it's safety, because it's all well and good, and you get that shoot done, but then then you have some horrendous accident like we've seen in Hollywood.
Right, you can see, the marks from the slap have disappeared, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But the results of killing someone are permanent, or injuring someone are permanent.
Exactly.
So I said I'd rather have the temporary discomfort than a long-term issue, and and if you break the protocols and you hurt somebody, it's going to come back on you. It's not going to come back on the production company, right? You'll be the blackballed pariah who doesn't get hired again because you hurt someone even though, you knew better. So we have to have a way to support people who are willing to make a courageous but unpopular decision if it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, and it is unpopular. This is the thing, even the message that I've put out, and it's crazy because you're like, well, how this shouldn't be unpopular. This is literally, bringing a solution to almost everything that we're talking about. And then it opens the doors for the other arms of the solution. But, where there's, like I said, where there's resistance for the people that don't want to be courageous. And so, I know that there's a lot of people, even locally. I got a message from a chief the other day, made it very clear that he doesn't like me. I was like, if the shoe fits.
You're a pretty likable guy, James. Come on.
So this is it. If you're offended or threatened by people that have literally done all the work, all the research, and I've got, people on the show from certainly over the US, all saying this is what we need to do, from the fire service itself to neuroscientists, neurosurgeons, sleep medicine experts from the military and sporting world. And there's a certain point where it's just like, and this affects me because this department protects my family. So I'm looking at it from a taxpayer's point of view as well.
To, I would say.
Yeah.
I shy away from the idea of the word protects because protection could only be done preemptively.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Response, because we are very reactive in the fire service.
Police don't protect you; they come, after the fact and write a report.
Exactly, but that'd be the one that was cutting my teenage son out of the car. That'd be the one that was pushing meds, and I know how overworked and sleep deprived they are. So no matter how you look at it, there is a solution. And what's interesting with your letter idea, though, what's happened in Florida is there's a revolution that's begun, and I hope that I'm part of some of the kind of information that they've used to move this forward, because I have been talking about it for 8 years now. But we've had 2 years ago, one department, Boynton Beach, excellent chief, went and they made the jump. The following year, another 7 fire departments in Florida have 2 big county departments, including Palm Beach County, where Trump lives. So now people are like, oh God, now the ripple effect is happening, and people are realizing, well, if you can't hire people now, how hard is it going to be when these departments around you go to this progressive shift and start taking all the recruits? So again, the worst ones are going to dig their heels in until the very end, and they're going to kind of collapse their department. But I think the middle of the road, the ones that were there was inertia, but they weren't bad leaders, they just needed a little poke. Those hopefully will start going to it now, and we'll see this kind of wave over Florida, which based on the messages I get, is already starting to wash across the country. So, there's
Look at
there's
that.
the letter thing, but it's also, the base
Yeah.
of the pyramid. If you can get the firefighters to understand it, and then all the way up the ladder, and then people start, as the time goes on, they start saying, we did start saving money. We have had recruitment go through the roof. Now these other departments, you can't deny it, and they can also go to these departments and say, well, how did you do it? That's exactly what we want you to do, because every single department I know that's gone to it, they've bent over backwards to help other departments do the same thing. So this is what's beautiful. You're going to have those ones that resist. I don't focus on that. I didn't respond to, the nasty gram that I got, basically, because I'm too focused on the ones that are going to make a difference. They will force change in the rest of the country. So this is what's exciting. The revolution has begun, as they say.
See, and now you've highlighted that there is an area in which Florida is progressive.
Yes. So, yep. Everywhere has their pros and their cons. Like Ron DeSantis, way he handled COVID, I thought was excellent. Very middle of the road. Shipping immigrants up to New York, not so much. No one's black or white, but yeah, Florida's doing this very well, and I hope that we see this kind of massive change here, because we are one of the states that are kind of very influential on the fire service itself. We have a lot of career firefighters. We're very fire and EMS focused. We get a lot of
FRI.
Yep, exactly. Right. So there's a lot of conferences. So we have the opportunity to really force change in the entire, and then even not in the US, then it can bleed over into Canada, and then have some of these conversations hopefully will even get Australia, the UK, other places looking at theirs.
Their smoke bleeds over to us, so we may as well bleed something up to them, right? Yeah. Let me ask you about something you said earlier when you were talking about 1,000 candidates for 30 positions, and that put departments in an opportunity, in a position where they could hire the model candidates, the best candidates. Do you think that there's a danger in defining what a best candidate is in terms of the effect that it's going to have on the homogeneity of the work group? Because if you hire people who all have the same traits, all excel at the same things, all bad at the same things, you're kind of you're creating an environment in which you're not going to have a lot of diverse views. And I don't mean this from a DEI perspective. I mean it from an innovation perspective. But innovation usually happens from people who have the minority view. And I wondered if you would caution against people who all, the effectiveness of a group of people who all think the same.
Yeah, I don't think, from what I've seen, to be fair, I haven't seen that in any of these hiring processes in numerous departments, because really what we're being tested on, aside from the insane psychological test, which is a whole different conversation, because that was never meant to be a standalone test, certainly not to deem the worthiness of a first responder if you talk to the psychology space. So we'll remove that and the polygraph out of it, because they're just, that's wasted money. But, you do a solid background check, you do a written test, so it's on the content, it's on what we're expected to do. I'm not very academic, so there's people that crush that test. And
I beg to differ on that, James, but
I can't read and it retains. So I have my own study style. I just buy every every practice test ever written, and I take them until I can't get them wrong anymore. That's my style. But so you have to figure out your way to do well on the academic. You have usually the CPAT, the BIDL, a version of a physical agility test. So again, extremely pertinent no matter how you think, your gender, your sexuality.
Sure.
You can or you can't. It's very kind of defined there. And nothing is like over and above where only, mostly males would pass. I've watched many women, many small men, end up being incredible tactical athletes. It's just about putting the work in. And then you have the interviews as well. And, I've come to it, like Orlando, I did the interview, Chief's interview. And it's funny because they'll say, oh, how do you think you contribute to the fire service? And by that point I had a podcast and I was writing my first book. They did not want to hear that. I tell you that right now. So you didn't actually want to know how I want to change, contribute. You actually want me to just be a nice little probie and shut the fuck up. Oh, excuse my language, and shut up. So again, which kind of department is even, which environment are you going into? You should be open, as you said, to different thinking and innovation. Now, of course, you've got to, pay your dues and gain the respect of people when you first walk in. But I'm amazed how many times I've been asked, what can you do? How can you contribute? And then you start doing that as you progress in, and then you're told to shut up. So you're absolutely right. But that's on the culture of the department. Anaheim, when I worked out there, they were amazing. The bar was set so high. So that was that 1,000 for 30 jobs. They would then cut 25% of the class by the time we got to the end of the year, just through attrition. They put the bar high. And if you couldn't reach it, thank you so much. There's loads of other departments that are hiring as well, but you're just not the right fit for us. And you ended up with a huge amount of innovation in that department.
Yes, Anaheim, the Orange County area.
Yeah. So
really doing great.
So I think it's less about the testing process and more about the culture of that particular department. If you just want your people to just run the calls and shut up, then, you're going to get that kind of person out of it. And sadly, that's my biggest resistance, fire departments, the firefighters in those kind of environments, because they don't have the capacity to critically think, and they're kind of brainwashed, not to be derogatory, but it's true. You put this, hey, you shouldn't be working these hours, you should be home with your family. And they're like, oh, no, it'll cost too much. I'm like, how? You're a firefighter. You've been on 16 months. You're not breaking down the economics of your department, but they've been told. Conversely, like I said, Anaheim, they trained us to such a great level. And with that great training becomes true leadership where, they trusted the captains to run the engine. They trusted the battalion chiefs to run the battalion, So, there wasn't that micromanaging element. And because they trusted each of the firefighters, most of our training were run by firefighters or engineers or maybe captains, and they'd gone to a conference and they came back and like, man, this new TIC is amazing, or I just saw this amazing hose lay, and they're like, all right, go teach it.
Andy Starnes said he likes it, right?
Mm-hmm, exactly. Yeah. So I think, with that, and it was it was Orange County, so not as diverse, not every, group represented perfectly, but, that as far as the thinking, you had, like one of my captains invented telestaff, for example, so you had computer guys, you had people that ended up making, forcible entry tools, and, had wildland gurus, and just all these different people. So, I think if you set the bar high, but like you said, you're not creating a kind of narrow hallway of the kind of person that you want. And you truly, when you're bringing them on, you do want them to be innovative one day, and you do want them to speak up if they got a good idea. Then that regular testing route can create an extremely diverse. And like you said, diversity, of course, should reflect the community that you're in as well. And I think that's where mentorship programs come in. But it also is literally personality types and, intellectual, like you said, innovation. So yeah, but I think I always refer back to Anaheim. They had the secret sauce. Do I know if it's the same now in 2025? No, but when I entered them in 2005, entered that department, it was incredible. And even like the fitness standards, there was no written standard, but there was a culture of fitness. So we would work out, we would play sports, we would do all this. And when you're on scene, the men and women in that uniform, they went to work.
Works very well. Well, change is inevitable, right? Change is the only constant. You talked earlier about going to the supermarket. There was a time when customers were not allowed in the supermarket. You came up to the desk and you gave them your list of groceries, and they fetched them for you and brought them up front. And then someone had the idea, well, what if we let the customers go in and pick out their groceries themselves? And the kid who suggested that to his boss was fired, and then opened up his own successful line of grocery stores called Piggly Wiggly, and then put his predecessors out of business. So innovation can't be stopped, but it can be pushed down.
Yeah,
but it sprouts. It sprouts eventually because out of necessity. So yeah. James, I'm just fascinated by the work that you have done and the materials that you've aggregated and the way you've advocated for the benefit of sleep, which is only just now becoming, recognized publicly, widely, as a key factor in health. So I hope that what you're working on takes off and that the departments adopt new schedules. And I wouldn't even say that it's a progressive schedule. It's returning to the common sense that we had before we started this crazy schedule. So thanks so much for joining me today, James.
Thank you so much, Steve. And for people listening, I'm going to flip the microphone around and get Steve on my podcast. So look for that in the future too. Thank you, mate.
Look forward to that. James Geering, check his work out on LinkedIn. Look at his books. It's Geering. Well, it's on the screen. You can read it, presumably, if you've had enough sleep. I'm Steve Wolf. I want to thank you once again for joining us here on the Firebreak. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. And until then, get some sleep.